All right, welcome to the Two Sons podcast. It's been 2 weeks since our last episode. Again, we've been dealing with our conflicting work schedules a little bit, but from what I understand, November 15th, which is literally 2 months and some change away, Luke starts his new gig with a better work schedule. We're going to start doing a lot more content. We're going to start doing NFL stuff. We're going to start doing some Game of Thrones stuff. Always Star Wars stuff as well. We're going to be doing it all, but we gain the flexibility to do it at that point as well. Plus, if you've ever noticed during these episodes, we kind of keep our voices down a little bit. It's because Wednesday mornings is the only time we can find where we have time to meet up. And his wife, who happens to be a nurse, works overnight, and so she's sleeping, and we have to stay quiet.
She's like, shut up about Thrawn.
It's like, oh, it's just my husband and his Star Wars podcast. You know, that's why I can't sleep.
My adult husband who has a Star Wars podcast with his best friend.
My adult husband who's also a doctor who is doing his Star Wars podcast.
Yeah, anyway. I mean, the plan is we're going to make a studio. I've got a wood shop / garage, and we're going to make that into... Luke. It's pretty much a wood shop, yeah. And we're going to make that into a podcast room as well. So we'll see how that works. People are probably dying on the other side of this. They're like, podcast room, sawdust, and electronics. But we'll make it work.
It's worth the mesothelioma, don't you think? I'm just kidding.
I'll get an air filter.
Anyway, so today, even though it's only been 2 weeks, I don't even think that's medically correct. I just wanted to throw a big long disease out. We're going to be doing, even though it's only been 2 weeks, we have both finished the second Thrawn book because it was outstanding.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Star Wars books I've ever read. We're going to dive into that today. We're also going to be doing a little follow-up on Luke and I watching The Force Awakens together 2 weeks ago. That will be probably...
It's the best of the worst.
Yes, it's the best of the worst. We're going to... that'll probably be released as a separate episode, but that is what we are recording today. And then we both have already just barely started the third Thrawn book. And so we'll be getting into that probably 2 weeks from now as well,
which I'm already loving. Mm-hmm. I've listened to probably 20 minutes of it and I'm already liking it. Mm-hmm. Just love it.
I'm a little bit further along than you, and same. So I'm gonna throw you a curveball here to start because so the ultimate premise of the second Thrawn book is that Darth Vader and Thrawn go on this mission together to search out a disturbance in the Force that Palpatine felt out in the unknown regions.
Yeah, just best friends out on an adventure.
Just two best friends that anyone could ever have out in, just a Sith Lord in armor and a Chiss general. Anyway, so we're gonna get to that for sure. But I'm gonna start with the curveball here because I think Star Wars is building towards something. I have a theory.
Yeah.
So the ultimate enemy that Thrawn and Vader end up dealing with.
Spoilers.
Yeah,
right
this
now.
is big time spoilers. This whole episode is spoilers. Just
non-stop.
Just spoilers. So anyway, the ultimate enemy that Thrawn and Vader end up facing in this book is known as the Grysk.
Right.
Okay. Now, in the beginning of this is their first time getting introduced, and it's still a little bit foggy, but we learn a lot more about them in the very beginning of the next book, which I don't think you quite have gotten to yet. But basically, they are a species of mystery that lives out in the unknown regions. Thrawn,
which apparently there's a lot of those. Like the Chiss are that still, and then the Grysk.
Exactly. And so in the beginning of the first book, when Thrawn Yorodo meets Palpatine for the first time,
you busting out the full name, true Star Wars fan,
the proper pronunciation. Mm-hmm. So of course, there's a scene in the book where Anakin's just being a jerk and just is like deliberately mispronouncing his name time and time again. Anyway, so Palpatine is basically interviewing Thrawn for the first time, and Thrawn basically states like there are things out in the unknown universe that are unknown regions, that are a legitimate threat to the galaxy, including the Empire, and you might need me to help defeat them one day. So basically, what's in the Grysk are in the unknown regions We don't know anything about them. Even the Chiss don't know anything about them. There's like rumors and theories.
Right.
No one even knows where they're from. Some people believe they're nomads. They could be from anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of different things. They're a warrior culture that believes in conquering.
They love to domineer.
Yeah, you will learn more about that at the very beginning of the third book, because you get to meet some of their specific military members and learn their names, and their military positions are like they're literally named like conqueror, or person of conquest or things like that. Like, and then we're gonna dive a little deeper into their client species, the way they can dominate a species to try to get them to help them,
essentially work for them. Yeah,
exactly. But this is where I'm gonna throw you the curveball. So. You have not heard too much about this species, but in the original legends, there was a species, a nomadic alien species that invades the New Republic, known as the Yuzan Vong.
Who you love.
They are, yes. They were a very, very interesting Star Wars concept.
Because they use like natural ships, correct?
Yeah, they had living ships, which the Grysk do not. So it's not a direct parallel. But my theory is that this is Disney canon trying to essentially come up with a replacement for the Yuzan Vong.
Oh, I see.
Which is what they were called.
Yeah.
And the Yuzan Vong eventually launch a full-scale invasion of the New Republic and have a great deal of success. They capture Coruscant. It gets ugly. And it turns into a war of a scale and a consequence much greater than even the Rebellion or the Clone Wars. It's a huge deal. And so I think that this whole story is setting up the framework for that. So my question for you is your initial impressions of the Grysk and how big of a threat you see them, and if you think this is Star Wars building towards something, or if it's just plot material for a Thrawn trilogy.
For a Thrawn trilogy. I think they're going to build into it. I really do. Because they've made such a big deal developing Thrawn, and I don't think they would have made such a big deal developing Thrawn unless there was a true reason for them to do so. And it's kind of funny because when you read the first book, you're trying to figure out, Thrawn's angle on all this. Like, why would Thrawn give up his entire life? Why would the Chiss give up Thrawn, who is an amazing military mind, and essentially give him up to the Empire? And I think, number one, they were worried about the Empire, but they also know about, the Grysk, and probably there's probably other potential hazards that are out there that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that this is leading into something big. Per our other predictions, I do think that this is going to be related to Ahsoka somehow, and I really hope that we see Thrawn and Ahsoka together in the Ahsoka show.
In general, the what they are trying to set Thrawn up as is a genuinely good being. Like, even when he has to be ruthless, it's as a means to accomplish his orders.
Let's talk about that really quick, though. So, I've been trying to get as much Thrawn as I can. Like, after starting these books again, I've gone through all like the Rebels shows that have Thrawn in them, and there is one part that I'm struggling with in Rebels, and maybe you remember this. Maybe you know.
Guess?
Yeah.
Is it when he opens fire on Lothal?
Yeah. And
it's so unlike him.
It's unlike him. So like, something that Jason and I like to do is, like, when we can, we like to, close the gap in plot holes potentially for Star Wars, right? Like, Jason and I do our best, I think, to like rationalize potential mistakes in the Star Wars universe and like make them make sense. I'm kind of struggling with that one. The only thing that I can think of, so for our viewers that don't know what we're talking about, in the final episode of Rebels, season finale on the last season, there's a part where the Chimera, which is Thrawn's ship, is above the city.
And the rebels infiltrate the facility, right? If I remember correctly.
And they're bombarding it, essentially they're bombarding the city, trying to get the rebels to do what they want them to do. So at some point, the rebels say, okay, like we'll stop, we'll do it. And then Thrawn's order is to continue the bombardment, which is very uncharacteristic of what we see Thrawn in this show. And the only thing that I can rationalize it is, like, maybe he felt like the rebels were just getting way too out of hand and he was just trying to snuff out any potential uprising. within the city that might not even have been the rebels. Like maybe he was just destroying, saying like, hey, this is getting out of hand. He likes things to be orderly, you know? And I'm wondering if that was just his way of snuffing it out, or it was just good cinematics and they needed a villain in the show and let him go crazy.
A couple different things. So first of all, the direct concept you're referencing is like throughout the books and really throughout Rebels in general, he's so incredibly respectful of his enemy,
right?
And he doesn't believe in the needless loss of life.
Correct.
That is like in the Thrawn book, he has never once ordered someone's death unnecessarily.
And furthermore, that's one of the reasons why he's trying so hard to rise in the Empire, is because he wants to be able to be in control of decision making to save life.
To limit that specific problem. Now, my couple things. First of all, there's two explanations. One, either Disney did not realize how big their plans were for Thrawn, and they're somewhat stuck in the sense that that episode was just produced so long ago that it doesn't fit with their current vision for Thrawn, which is possible. I would say
apparently
that
this book came out around the same time. And then,
oh, really?
Yeah, and then Thrawn, from what I know, is Timothy Zahn's character from Legends material. So when I was looking at the release dates for these books and for Rebels, it was around the same time.
Interesting. For some reason, I thought these books were newer, but I guess not.
I could be wrong.
No, but that could be right, because I think the first one was 2017, which is a pretty long time ago. That's 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I think Rebel season 2 or 3 were coming out around that time. So you're right.
I think 2017, 2018 timeframe. I could be wrong, but
so then that lends credence to my second theory, which is Thrawn wins every time.
True.
In the books, he is yet to be bested.
Yeah,
it is possible that Kanan Jarrus and the Rebels actually frustrate him to the point of losing his character. Like that's a
really good point.
Like they routinely escape him.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the beginning of this Thrawn Alliances book involves anger that Vader feels towards Thrawn for him losing at Adalon.
True, and he just keeps
rebels.
Bringing it up.
And he keeps bringing it up,
Uh-huh.
and he blames it on his softness, basically.
Yeah.
Palpatine has Thrawn's back and realizes it wasn't his fault. But
and even going from that, even if it's strategy, so even if Thrawn wasn't lashing out, but there may be a strategic angle that Thrawn's taking with that, where he is trying to show the Empire that he can be ruthless if needed, and maybe that's how he's trying to keep his position as well. Because if he just danced around the fact that he was getting beat by rebels, I think Palpatine specifically would want to see him show some aggression. Essentially,
it's very possible that he communicated with Vader and Palpatine after the facility was infiltrated. True. And then they ordered him to open fire on the facility.
True.
But point is that's explainable.
It's explainable. Yeah.
Even though it doesn't seem great, but anyway. So to get back on track here, so like basically the Yuzan Vong concept, it's just something I want to drop in here, because I have a feeling that there's a chance that in the future we'll be tying back into this conversation.
Seeing some parallels.
When the Grysk become a bigger threat.
Yeah.
It kind of fits within Disney's want, I think, unnecessarily, but a want that I think that to get away from the traditional Sith versus Jedi concept, which I disagree with, but that if they were to go that route, I would support it at least.
It could be interesting.
Yeah.
It could be really interesting. Like
I found it more interesting than the Nihil.
That's exactly. So, and it does parallel the Nihil in some degree with the High Republic books, right?
Yeah, because the Nihil are just drugged up raiders. That's really all they are.
That listen to what do they call it? Space rock or something like that?
Yeah, some kind of space rock. Space punk rock.
Space punk rock. And they just get crazy.
They're all very emotional.
Crazy. No, I agree. They're a lot more sophisticated and I think lethal is how I look at them.
Exactly.
Like I think of like the Nihil as like this dysfunctional band of marauders that just wreck things in their path, and if like one of them accidentally kills themselves, they're like, no big deal. But the Grysk seem a lot more calculated.
They're calculated more like of a warrior tribe that's more like disciplined.
Yeah,
but like the one we're underselling it a little bit. Markion Rowe is fascinating. We don't have to get too much further, but yeah, he's fascinating. But my point is like keep your eye on this Grysk concept, because I could see it coming up in live action in the future. It could also directly be what, like, it could be that Ahsoka finds Thrawn and Thrawn's like, hey, I'm no longer with the Empire. I need your help to deal with this threat.
Oh,
It's very possible.
Good guy Thrawn.
And the entire Ahsoka series could be based on
See?
Grysk. Like, that's the kind of thing that
I honestly still think
towards.
that Thrawn could end up being good.
Because when the Empire ceases to exist, what obligation does he have to continue those motives?
Well, like what we were just talking about. Yeah, I mean, he has... First of all, he is loyal to the Chiss, which I think is going to be the centerpiece of the third book, or one of the centerpieces to the third book. So we know he's loyal to the Chiss, but he's also loyal to life, is what we found out. So I mean, I do think that Thrawn could end up being good guy Thrawn.
Yeah, and so we know that Ahsoka asks that chick, the magistrate. She asks the magistrate, "Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?" And it's very possible that she just says, like, he's not working for anybody in the Empire anymore. Like, we don't know where he is. And then maybe he's with the Chiss Ascendancy. Anyway, we won't pontificate about it anymore. But I'm very, very interested to see where all that goes. So the next direction I wanted to go with this was the dynamic between Vader and Thrawn and Palpatine. So the second book opens with the two of them standing in front of Palpatine. And there's a little bit of tension hanging in the air because this is right after Atollon and right after Thrawn lost Kanan Jarrus and his rebels. To the Bendu. So, which I'm still rewatching Rebels. I need to refamiliarize myself with a lot of that stuff. But anyway, so Vader seems to have immediate contempt for Thrawn, because he kind of represents everything that he's not, is my theory. So where I wanted to start with this is like the direct differences between the two. Because the pathway that the book follows is in this journey out to the fringes of the unknown regions. Because Batuu is in Empire space. It's in Empire controlled space.
Just barely.
Just barely. And then they go further into the unknown regions to get to the planet where the Separatist base is and stuff like that. But basically, the story follows two timelines. The timeline towards the tail end of the Clone War, before Count Dooku's death, when Anakin and Padme, one of Padme's handmaidens, discovers a separatist operation in the unknown regions, and basically when signals to Padme, she gets killed. The handmaiden does, and then Padme goes out to try to figure out the problem. Anakin has to finish a mission for the Galactic Republic, so he's late to get out there. But that storyline follows gets like told at the same time as Thrawn and Vader going out to the same planet for a separate mission to discover a disturbance in the Force. And in the old timeline, Anakin ends up meeting with Thrawn Yorodo.
Right. And it's such a cool concept. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's incredible. I thought the peak of the dynamic, because Thrawn, like, so smart, he's like, this is the same dude. Like, Thrawn's like, okay, bro. Like, I know. I know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The Anakin Skywalker's dead. Okay, bro.
I know.
Like,
you know that I know.
You know that and it kind of gets embarrassing for Vader at the end,
dude,
when he keeps like saying like Anakin Skywalker's dead, and he's like,
yes. Okay.
So I've heard. And it's actually kind of funny because at the end there's like a moment of acceptance from Thrawn where instead of saying "so I've heard," like he says all the other times, he says "I know," kind of like sadly.
Well, and there was that really cool part too, where even though Vader's saying, "Hey, Anakin's dead," Thrawn's still like, "Well, something about like the idea of Anakin still lives on," or something like that, or like
his legacy lives on.
His legacy lives on, which I thought was
I will continue
so
to honor
cool.
his legacy,
which I thought was so cool.
So, what's your favorite? Because I have my guess. I had a moment. It was one of my favorite Star Wars moments, actually, but I want to hear what your thoughts are. What was your favorite moment in the Thrawn Vader dynamic in this book? If you can, I want to see if you can guess what I'm hinting at. You have like 10 seconds.
So, well, first, there was one part that I thought was odd, not my favorite.
Okay, let's hear it.
Thrawn really knows how to get some trust from somebody. Like, over and over and over, he's like, "Trust me, Vader." And Vader's like, "Shit."
All right. Okay, he's never been wrong. All right.
I think my favorite dynamic was, or my favorite part of their relationship was after Vader got to get into the TIE Defender, and they end up like having like a productive conversation
About
with
the
each
TIE
other
Defender.
about the TIE
It needs to
Defender
be
and how
faster
to
more
like
powerful weaponry.
improve it. Yeah.
But other than that, I will vouch for the ship's
Right.
project. Yeah, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
Vader basically loves flying the TIE Defender, which is cool. Because
Right.
it's kind of cool because like at its core, it's Anakin Skywalker, the pilot, which is the moment I was trying to hint at. So we are going to the Chiss. It turns out that the disturbance in the Force is the fear coming from these young Chiss girls. And these young Chiss girls, as it turns out, are Force sensitive. And the Grysk have captured them. And the reason why is because these girls, their Force sensitivity manifests as precognition, the ability to see the future. Mm-hmm. In the unknown regions, there, and this is a concept that is dived into in so many different ways through the Star Wars universe, not the least of which is trying to get to Exegol and you're flying through a damn nebula. Mm-hmm. But the point is there was some sort of cataclysmic event that took place, a cataclysmic like astronomy event that took place in the unknown regions that makes it so that all of the hyperlanes are unstable.
Yeah, which it's funny that you're talking about this right now because it's just dawning on me why the unknown regions are essentially called the unknown regions is because they're such a pain in the butt to traverse.
Exactly.
And I've always wondered, like, why hasn't the Empire just been out there? It's like, that just makes sense. Okay, anyways.
There's a million, and the two places that are like this are the unknown regions and the deep core. Yeah. But basically in both of these places, you can't just take hyperlanes. What you have to do is do what's called micro jumps.
Yeah.
And it can take days to traverse from system to system because you're going like bzz, 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 like all over the place, and you have to do these like temporary calculations of short distances. Right. So basically, the Chiss, who are presumably the most powerful entity out in the unknown regions, they use these Force-sensitive young girls as navigators, and that's how they they can essentially, through the Force, determine whether or not a jump is safe. Right. Which allows them to take much longer jumps in the unknown regions and travel. So the Grysk steal a bunch of these young navigators to help them traverse the unknown regions, which is an example of their great threat. Right. But at the end...
Well, and they do it for a couple of reasons, too, because they like to dominate. Yep. So they're stealing...
something sacred to the Chiss.
What they think is sacred, and then they're also using them because they want to be able to navigate more efficiently.
Exactly. And I do want to dive into that stealing concept because that's very, very important, because I'll save it for just a second because I want to get to this specific point. So there's a moment at the end where they need to race to Mokivja, and they need to beat a Grysk flotilla there, because there's 3 additional Chiss girls there. They save a total of 8 of them in the book. But it's cool because Thrawn goes like, hey, like, I need your help for this part of the mission. Yeah. And Vader goes like, Vader in the back of his head is like, ugh, like he's patronizing me, basically, like all this stuff. And then Thrawn goes like, no, like, I need you to be our navigator to get us there faster than the Grysk, because your power in the Force is more than capable of doing it. So Vader essentially has to go down into the pit and get into the navigator chair and fly the Chimera.
Can you imagine Vader sitting in front of it?
just working a little joystick. So it's one of my favorite Star Wars moments. So like Vader's there and he's sinking into the Force, and Thrawn is standing on the command bridge, and Thrawn starts to smile a little bit. And Vader that was a cool scene. Vader looks up at him and goes like, "Are you amused by something, Admiral?" And then Thrawn goes like, "No, not at all." He's like, "I just had a memory." And he's like, "What?" And he's like, the word we use for our young navigator girls is like, and then he mentions like a Chiun phrase. And then he goes, that directly translates in basic to Skywalker. Yeah. And then he just kind of like smirks, and then he walks down the bridge, and then Vader like turns back to the thing. And it's just it's like the 17th different way that Thrawn basically rubs in his face that he knows who he is. But it didn't feel like that. It was more of like a genuinely sentimental moment where Thrawn, like, which is the kind of thing that Thrawn appreciated. So like, I thought that was cool. And ultimately at the end, that's a really good pickup. Throughout the entire book, Vader has these doubts in Thrawn, but they always come to fruition. the ultimate fear for Vader is Thrawn's loyalty, because Vader views this Grysk threat as not a threat to the Empire, and he basically puts a ton of pressure on Thrawn to prove that they were a threat to the Empire. Do you remember what the reason why they were the threat? I'm trying to think.
I think Thrawn's major point, and maybe our viewers can add in on this in the comments, but I think his main point was that the Grysk are essentially trying to dominate, and they're also messing with their ability to travel, anybody's ability to travel out in the unknown regions. So I think Thrawn's point was to shut that down.
It was impeding progress. The other big one was he used military tactics to demonstrate to Vader that the Grysk had absolutely been monitoring the Empire including
that's what it was too,
including during the Clone Wars.
I forgot about that.
Including during the Clone Wars. And then there's actually a moment, I believe it's in the epilogue, where Thrawn strongly hints that it was the Grysk who actually... Okay, so we're going in the weeds here. So
that's what this show's about, man.
Exactly. Darth Bane originally works...
Oh, it's another Bane reference. Everyone, I'm so sorry. Two Sons podcast.
And
a podcast about
Darth Bane. So Darth Bane works originally, before he gets discovered by the Sith, he works in a cortosis mine. And the cortosis mine is very important because the actual material cortosis has an immense ability to disperse energy weapons, which makes them practically invulnerable to laser fire, and has the unique ability when a lightsaber hits the cortosis, it actually overloads the lightsaber and shuts it off. Yeah, it shuts it off. It's like a big deal. But anyway, so
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. So it turns out in this Thrawn book that this place Mokivja has a cortosis mine on it, and the Separatists are weaving cortosis into clone trooper armor and into the
battle droids.
The battle droids.
B1 and B2s.
Which is really confusing on a bunch of different levels if you don't know the ultimate end of the story and understand that Dooku actually works for Palpatine as well. But actually that's what you're thinking the whole time, is like, oh, like they're gonna like do some infiltration stuff here. This is like an ultimate like trump card in case Order 66 fails, like all this kind of stuff.
It's a really cool concept.
Thrawn basically proves to Darth Vader at the end that it's highly likely that it was the Grysk who were actually convincing the Separatists to do this specific thing with the cortosis on the clone troopers, and that their specific strategy involves mass infiltration rather than brute force.
I see,
that kind of thing. And it was a super interesting concept, but essentially Thrawn does prove his loyalty at the end, and the way he proves it to Vader is he announces himself to the Grysk warship as Admiral Mithran Yorodo rather than Grand Admiral Thrawn of the Galactic Republic.
Right.
Essentially making it so that he's presenting the Chiss as the threat to the Grysk rather than the Empire.
Right.
And eventually at the end, the Darth Vader relents and essentially has like an internal moment where he goes like, Palpatine, my master sees this person as useful to our cause, so therefore I will continue
I'm not going to kill him.
To support
right here
him.
In front of everybody.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the Vader-Thrawn dynamic in the whole book.
Excellent.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it was super cool because they're both powerhouses, but in completely unique ways. Like Vader is just ultimately powerful, and he's just an immediate threat to anybody around him. And then Thrawn has a completely different approach. And actually, Thrawn has a completely different approach than any admiral or Moff in the entire Empire. Like, right? So like we see his dynamic a lot with Pharaoh. And I thought it was really cool because throughout the entire book, he's cultivating Pharaoh like he cultivated Eli Vanto. And to the point where like Pharaoh's even uncomfortable. Like there's that part where she's in close quarters with Vader, and Thrawn's like questioning her in order to like make her come to a conclusion, and she's just so uncomfortable because she's just feeling like she's gonna get offed by Vader at any second.
Choked out at any second. Like,
but the point is though, it's just like, okay, so that's valuable for Pharaoh in the future too, because then she's going to be making decisions and she's not going to have Vader looming over her. So any decision after that's going to feel easy. So it's so cool how he cultivates his crew. And the other thing too is that's one of the things that bothered So Thrawn's crew, if they questioned something, they'd bring it up, which is actually incredibly productive. Like, for example,
it's collaborative.
It's collaborative.
Diversity of opinion.
Right. And for example, taking my clinic, like when my medical assistant's like, hey, are you sure you want to do this instead of this? I love when they bring that up. Or like, hey, on this order, did you mean it to send it to this specialist instead of this specialist? And like the fact that they're looking at that, like double checking work.
It's like a filter for
you. It's so good. Yeah.
And even if they're wrong, a half dozen times, but like 2 or 3 times they save you from a mistake, then it's worth it. It's worth it. Or even if it's not a mistake, it's just maybe it's something that wastes some time or something. It's an inefficiency. It's you want to be collaborative, and that brute force attitude comes with a ton of shortcomings. Like Vader throughout the original trilogy just executes anybody who
stands up to him. Yeah.
And so everyone is terrified.
Exactly.
And there's a case to be made that actually is not a good
it's not good style. At all. Well, and that's actually seen, this is a huge rabbit hole. But anyways, there's a book called Outliers. Have you ever read it? So
is it a Star Wars book?
No. It's not a Star Wars book. Is it a
leadership book?
It's kind of like a
business book?
It's like a book about kind of success. I don't know. It's been years and years and years since I've read it. It's been like a half decade since I've read it. So, but there's one part that stood out to me, and it's about pilots and how dangerous it is if a co-pilot who's a lesser pilot than the person who they're sitting next to can't feel like they can speak up, to the point where like planes have literally crashed themselves into mountains because the co-pilot's too fearful to say something.
That's so sketchy.
And how big of a problem it is, and how beneficial it is for superiors to listen to the people who work for them. Yeah.
And one of the most interesting dynamics throughout this entire book is the difference in approach in general between Vader and Thrawn.
Right.
Because Vader is very impulsive and just thinks he can brute force Jedi his way out of every situation. Yes. And that happens with Anakin in the old timeline, and it happens with Vader in the new timeline.
Right.
Side by side in the book, to the point where like even at the end of the book there's this catastrophic mistake. Like Thrawn's like, hey, we sabotaged this factory, because they end up sabotaging the Cortosis factory, and that's being put into the droids. And basically it was like a subtle defect that was gonna cause the droids to basically overload themselves after like 5 minutes of combat. Right. Every time they'd fire their weapon, it would basically slowly fry their own brain. Genius on Thrawn's part.
Right.
And so basically at the end of the book, Anakin's like, actually, I'm just going to blow up the mine.
Dude, I know.
And then like Thrawn's like, that's a terrible idea.
And everyone who's working there is just like, all right, Anakin, what's going on here, dude?
So basically what happens is like Padme tries to stop him. She can't. Thrawn tries to stop him. He
good
can't.
Old Anakin.
And then as they're pulling away, like Anakin collapses the mine, but he stupidly forgets that Cortosis basically like can offset or like disperse his energy in a bunch of different ways, and it ends up dispersing the blast down into the crust of the planet and basically opening up a super volcano.
And they're all just sitting there in the ship just like, oh my gosh. And like, then the guy who lived there is just like, dude, you just ruined my world.
One of the locals is like on the ship with them because he helped him and he needs to depart. And like literally like Padme at one point's like, well, at least the lava's not landing on the city. And the guy's like, yeah, it's just on all of our farmland.
Yeah. That's so bad. It's so messed
funny.
up.
But the point is like everything Thrawn does is so calculated. He considers every contingency. There's a dope part at the end of the book where literally like Vader goes like, don't pretend like you haven't come up with a plan for how to kill me.
I know.
And he kind of like, Thrawn literally smirks and goes like, I've actually thought of 3 different ways to kill you.
It's so cool. He's just the ultimate tactician. Like he's just ready to go in all whatever happens, he's got a plan for. He's thought about it all. Well, and it's kind of funny. I saw this interview with Timothy Zahn, and he talks about how Thrawn's portrayed in Rebels, and this is a take from the channel Star Wars Explained.
You'll have to send me this clip.
It's cool. So the guy from Star Wars Explained is talking with him, and he's like, how do you think Thrawn was portrayed in the movie or in the Rebels. And number one, it made me happy that Timothy Zahn said that he liked the way that Thrawn was portrayed, which I thought was cool because it's essentially, his baby. And the only time that Thrawn gets beat is when there's something completely unforeseeable like Bendu.
Yeah.
Just showing up.
Or these giant space whales.
Exactly.
Or space octopus whales that can spread their tentacles and jump to hyperspace.
Yeah,
completely.
Yeah, to your point is Thrawn has contingency plans on top of contingency plans.
Exactly.
It's wild.
No, and that dynamic is on display throughout the entire book. And there was, I'll give Vader a little bit of credit, because for being a guy who just kind of walks in every situation waving his lightsaber, the Grysk have this, again, more Yuzan Vong type references. Even though they don't use organic ships, they use a bunch of weird tech. So for instance, they have the ability, they have devices that can operate as gravity wells while also operating a cloaking device, which is something the Empire has never been able to figure out. And it does it by quickly alternating between the two. They have all these different types of weapons, but one of the ones that they end up using on Vader that has a lot of success is these swarms of insects.
Oh, that was so cool.
That disintegrate and turn into basically rapidly hardening cement that will trap. And so at one point, Vader actually walks a empty suit of armor using the Force, because he has a backup suit of armor. He ends up walking an empty suit of armor into a room holding his lightsaber just to get covered in the swarms of bugs so that he can jump in after the fact and kill them all.
The whole entire time that I was reading that, I was just like, how much does Vader's suit cost?
Seriously.
For him just to throw it into a room and just fake walk it for it to just get ruined,
There's a call from the Emperor and he's like, really? 3 more suits this month? Dude, do you understand each one of those costs 10 million credits? You should be dead. That thing keeps you alive. It's literally a walking life support system. Okay?
I know, the whole entire time is man, that's an expensive tactic. Yeah.
If you do it one more time, we're going to have to make Director Krennic or Admiral Thrawn give up their pet projects. That's the plot of the beginning of the 3rd book, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, I wanted to couple of quick things. The idea of the client species. So, the Grysk. Okay. The Grysk. What's the name of the species that they turn into the? I can't remember what it.
The ones with the swords on their side.
I can't remember what they're called, but there's a species of alien that they're working with that has. Boy, you are exceptionally needy today.
She is, man.
I've done nothing but pet you for a half hour, and the couple times I've stopped.
She was cooped up because the electrician was here yesterday, so she was stuck in the back bedroom.
It's okay. Anyway, so the client species that they
we're talking about Lola the dog, by the way, for anyone who's not watching this and listening to it. She's being incredibly demanding about Jason's attention right now. She's very upset at him because he stopped petting her.
No, she's literally stomped on my foot and has gotten into my personal space now. Thank you. So the Darshi. Thank you. See, Lola distracted me just long enough for me to remember. So so the Grysk, basically what the Grysk do, and this is really interesting. They basically research the opponent that they're trying to dominate for the sake of their own ulterior motives. But what they do is they discover something that is deeply personal and important to them, and they take it from them. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening is Thrawn discovers that these Darshi have these ceremonial daggers that are incredibly intricate, and they're not meant for combat except for ceremonial combat. They're just a cultural status symbol. And he discovers this by finding out that their sheaths don't match with the ones that they're actually carrying.
Which who would notice that? You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's ridiculous. So basically he has discovered that the Grysk have stolen these swords from the Darshi and have basically held that over their heads to force them to be their servants.
Right.
And that even can get extended to the Chiss concept, where they're taking away something sacred to their people, because these young navigators, they can't be used for that long. They're only force sensitive between typically age 7 and 14. And so essentially they're immensely sacred to the Chiss people. Right. And that's why Thrawn is so hell-bent on rescuing them. But so I'm really curious in this 3rd book who the client species is going to be, because it's kind of implied that the Grysk are attempting to generate a ton of client species throughout the galaxy to serve their ultimate goals. And it's a very interesting concept and one that makes them a terrifying entity.
The term client species actually cracks me up, though.
How so?
Well, it sounds very... it sounds like not like a bad thing, but it's actually a terrible thing to be a client species to the Grysk, right? Like, could you imagine? That would suck. What's your thoughts? Okay, so again, we've talked about some of the ways, or at least me personally, the ways that I've viewed at least employees of the Empire has changed, in the sense that, like, it's just a lot of people who want to have a job, like Eli Vanto, for example, or how Thrawn's really not a bad guy, even though before reading these books, I always thought he was.
Commodore Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, yeah. So what's your take on, I forget his name, the Darth Vader's right-hand stormtrooper. What's his name?
Oh, I can't remember his name, but I know who you're talking
What's
about.
What's your take on, do you think he's a good guy or a bad guy?
He just strikes me as your textbook soldier.
Yeah.
Like there's a moment at the end, a moment that I've always thought about frequently, like throughout human history, I've always wondered if at moments where soldiers knew death was near, if they ever at the end felt like they were pawns in a game. Like, for instance, if you were fighting in World War I and you were like, man, because the Archduke of something got killed, now I have to die in this damn trench, sure. like that kind of thing. And like there's a moment like that with this guy where he knows a Grysk ambush is coming. He knows it's right on the other end of the door, and he's like, I'm literally gonna die right now for these damn Chiss girls. Yeah. Like, how messed up is this? And then he ends up getting saved by, what's his name? Rook.
Rook. Yeah, Rook is so cool. Yeah,
Rook from Rebels. You remember like the little alien guy that's like a little golem looking dude? Yeah. He ends up saving all the stormtroopers. But it's such an interesting concept because I've thought about that all the time. Like, there are human conflicts that are righteous, that men and women are willing to give their lives for, but there are also like political conflicts that result in human death.
Tragic.
And then also just in general, like when soldiers' lives are put on the line for philanthropic things like rescuing for instance, these Chiss girls, like it's like you're doing something good. But even before he opens the door, or even before the door opens, like he does kind of have a moment of acceptance, kind of like that, like this is the soldier's life. This is what I do. Right. And but you're right. And I think the Thrawn book has done an outstanding job of humanizing the Empire.
It has.
On so many different levels.
Which is going to be interesting because in some capacity, I think we might see that contrast with the Andor series. Because I think we're going to see like
the pompous political
gluttony. On the side of the Empire. So it's going to be interesting to see that contrast. But there's obvious divides too, where you see people like Eli and Pharaoh, but then that also contrasts sharply with a lot of the people who are the higher ups, the people who do want power, the people who are not just clocking in as a day job. They're like seeking something, and it might be evil. So I think we'll see that highlighted in the Andor series for sure.
No, I'm excited about that, and we'll see. And for the record, the Thrawn book does touch on that a lot. I mean, Governor Price.
Price is the worst.
This third book, man, dude, Director Krennic sucks. Yeah, and he's got this like right hand man who he sends on Thrawn's ship, and he's just a little pain in the butt. Like, really, just a lot of like political like. There's just a lot of political infiltration into the military.
I see.
Did you have anything else from this book that you wanted to touch on?
Let's play the game where you decide if this adds on to Star Wars universe in a positive way, yes or no.
Yes, absolutely. Don't even need to.
There's not much. Yeah, there's not much to be said. Most definitely, the first two books significantly add into Star Wars lore.
Yeah, it's Thrawn is just an awesome opportunity for Star Wars to add a unique type of new character.
I'd say
I hope that they continue
Thrawn right now. I'm like a Thrawn fangirl right now.
Dude, I am totally like a Thrawn fangirl.
Top 4 favorite characters other than droids in Star Wars, I think.
Dude, he's like awesome alien dude mixed with Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. Mixed with like kind of like that classic idea that always does well, which is like the villain that is righteous in a lot of ways, like
calculated.
Yeah, dude,
just analytical. Yep. No, but I'm done. I'm good.